So, you know that chill scene from Chrono Trigger where everyone sits around the campfire? Well, I made a book nook based on it. Or, well, this is a game, so instead of book nook, a game grotto? I'm Nick, and this is Mr. Screenwrite, and I make crafts based on the stories I love from games, movies, and TV. I'm using Sculpey firm clay to make these characters. They're all about the size of a penny, but the key is to bake in layers, and here they are after the first round of baking. Here's Chrono. I know I'm going to butcher some of these names. Lucca. Marle, like Carl, I guess. Magus? No, Magus? A tough one. Frog. Ayla. And Robo. I think he turned out the best. Now, like I said, I sculpted in layers. I'm still learning, which is why it's so hard to film and edit my process in this. It's a lot of trial and error. But at this scale, it's all about breaking down the characters into shapes. Make a lot of circles and tubes and squish them together to make the general shape of the character. And when I get to the point where sculpting more starts to ruin what I already sculpted, then I know it's time to bake. Then, after it's done, I layer on the next round of sculpting. So usually the process goes body, then legs, and arms, and stuff like scarves and capes, and then I get to heads, and then hair. I tried to find a style that was sort of like making the sprite characters into 3D, and then filling in any details using the illustrations as reference. I think I got pretty close, but ultimately these characters kind of end up passing the few feet away test. Up close, you can definitely tell what characters they're supposed to be, especially once I started painting. I think they really look best when you're a few feet away. That's why I filmed inches away from these characters. I guess it'll come in handy when I make like a look how far I've come video about my sculpting, and hopefully it's actually an improvement. So when you look at the scene in the game, Chrono is sleeping, but it didn't feel right to hide the main character like that, so I referenced a sprite where he's sitting up instead from the game. So any purists out there, please forgive me, and please keep watching. I decided to paint these characters with the bold colors of the sprite art, rather than trying for anything realistic. The closest I got to that was giving Robo a black wash after painting him this pristine gold, and that was really just to knock it down a bit, because he's supposed to be pretty worn down in this scene. And I'm still working on how to paint eyes. Don't give me too hard a time that Chrono and Ayla end up looking a lot more like this than their normal versions. Now that I have the characters ready to go, I'm going to use them and these diorama trees I bought to lay out the space I need for the scene. I'm using pink insulation foam board as the base, and a tea light candle is going to provide our campfire. And with the right lighting, I feel like I'm in the forest already. Anyway, time to cut out the base and mark where the trees and characters will go. Then I cut a hole on the top for the candle flame to poke through and dug out the bottom so it will rest inside the base. If you've seen my other videos, you know I love to use aluminum foil to texture the ground. I'm going to do the same here, and then give it the tried and true Mod Podge and paint coat. This time, I opted to use a dark brown instead of black, and it does not look pleasant when wet. When that dried, I dry brushed the ground to give it more texture and highlight. I just used a variety of brown paint starting from darkest to lightest, and for dry brushing, you want to get almost all the paint off your brush and then just use light strokes to highlight the details. Once that dried, I used watered down Mod Podge to provide the glue for some gravel that I sprinkled around where the fire's going to go, because our heroes practice fire safety. They don't put fire directly on the grass in a giant forest. Then I chopped some wood, and the size of this wood, that's pretty much what I could chop in real life. Gave it a dry brushing of brown paint for the firewood. And with that in place, I spread the watered down Mod Podge around for the grass and then sprinkled it on. I should have covered the fire better, I realized, because I had to clean that up a little bit. Either the glue was still just a little wet or this grass found its way into cracks. But I got that all fixed up, moved on to the trees. These trees are from Michael's. They came in a pack of 3 and they really were on clearance for less than $5. And I decided it was worth buying them rather than trying to make my own. The tea light as is gives a nice glow, but the flame on it's really smooth and boring. It doesn't work at all, and so I put it into place and used hot glue to embellish the flame a little bit. I'm just putting some hot glue down and then using a silicone brush to sculpt the glue right before it sets. This also diffuses the light a little bit more, and I think it makes a really great effect for the fire. Then I used my Mod Podge mixture to create some more layers of grass. This time I used a darker color sprinkled on, and the clearing from the game scene has these darker patches throughout, so I don't know, I thought it really just sort of helped sell that this is a dense, dark forest to have light grass and dark grass at the back of the scene. I wanted this book nook to work whether the candle was on or not. So I used some orange and yellow paints, starting from darkest at the base to lightest at the top of the flame, and painted this. I think I lost a little bit of the tea light's color coming through, but it makes it look a lot better when I don't have the light on. I spread the tacky glue up the trunk to try and fill in the gap from them being these cheap Michael's trees. It didn't really work, but the glue did give a little more of a layer that I could paint onto, so that these trunks didn't look so plain. Then I put one more layer of grass down to sort of blend everything together, make sure the base of these trees were covered, and I think it's looking pretty great so far. Now I'm going to move on to making the background for this scene, but before I do, let's take a self-promotion break. Hey, would you like to see your name entered onto the screen here? Then what are you waiting for? Check out my Patreon below. Supporting the channel will help me with supplies, and you'll get a shout out and other perks. Take a look and support if you can. Thanks. Now, back to the video. I used some craft wood to make the backdrop for the scene. These were scraps I had around, so I didn't have anything big enough for the scene that I wanted. I glued 2 pieces together, painted them black as a base coat. My vision was to create this background as kind of a 2.5D background that would make the forest extend further behind the scene without having to make 20 trees. So using a wooden dowel, some wire, hot glue, modeling paste, I made this half a tree and then textured it so it would look like the tree bark. And this tree that I'm making right now is going to serve as sort of the transition point from these fully 3D trees to the 2.5D to like purely 2D trees on this background. I painted the background a nice dark purple and used some black paint to create sort of a gradient. This felt like the right color sky for the scene. It's sort of cartoony, and I painted on little stars to sell the effect. Once that was painted, I created the other trees for the background using hot glue and modeling paste. The intent here was that these trees would be flatter, smaller, they're going to be further in the background. I used modeling paste to give them texture with a brush, and this helped give the paint something to hold on to too, rather than just hot glue. And then I painted them a dark brown. And I wasn't really careful here because I knew that any mistakes I made where I painted onto the purple sky, I was just going to sort of follow the shapes of these hot glue trees and make it look like there were even more tree trunks behind them. And so this forest just sort of went from 3D trees to 2.5D tree to these hot glue flat trees to then purely flat painted trees. In my supplies, I had some vine-looking diorama foliage I hadn't used yet, and so I put blobs of tacky glue and then clumps of this foliage to create the tangle of leaves for the treetops. Then I used the 2.5D tree to fill in the gap. This is where it's going to be most prominent when you're looking at the scene and help sort of blend from these 3D trees to the background. For this one, I used some clump foliage for the treetop. This gave it more depth and fit with the style of the other full trees better. With that tree in place, I used some more pink foam to create some slopes to really hide the seams from the background to the book nook space. This really would help sell that it wasn't just a 90-degree angle at the back of the scene, but a forest continuing into the distance. I did a short and messy version of previous steps to cover this. Mod Podge, base coat, watered down Mod Podge, sprinkled grass on top. After I glued the background to the base, I used more clump foliage to hide any gaps here so that they were sort of bushes. These are some pretty basic tricks. The sort of stuff that they use on stage, like for plays, to give the illusion of depth in a scene when it's really a pretty shallow space. And I think that using all this together turned out really great. So with a generous drop of tacky glue onto the bottom of each of these characters, it's time to get them all in place and ready for their big moment. I really love this scene because it is such a nice moment in the game. Not many games, especially when Chrono Trigger came out, have these quiet moments where we get to see the characters just talk and relax in between the big moments of plot and crazy action. And I think that's why this scene has become so iconic, because when you strip away all that other stuff, we still love these characters even if they're sitting around a campfire just talking. I think they're ready for their close-up. Let's roll the glamour shots. had a ton of fun making this scene. I felt like there's a lot of fan art from this game, but not a whole lot being made like this. And so if you liked it, this Book Nook game grotto thing, whatever you want to call it, subscribe, hit the bell for notifications. I have plans for even more crafts based on games, movies, and TV shows that I love. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next video.